everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thanks for joining me. Back at it with another video. I want to talk to you guys about this upcoming conjunction between the Sun in Capricorn and Pluto in Capricorn. And yeah, I want to muse on that just a little bit because it's definitely going to be a pretty eye-opening transit. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm a Western astrologer with an emphasis in working both with the art of the Sabian symbols as well as tarot to be able to assess what's going on in the cosmos, look at it a little bit deeper and a little bit more esoterically. If you like my content, make sure you click the button below and you're subscribed so that way you are alerted as to when I have new videos coming out on the channel. And to those of you guys who are members and subscribers who are returning, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Interesting happenings. We've got a lot of planets that are getting ready to station. Mercury is getting ready to wrap its retrograde. Mars just recently did. And it's the end of January, really all the way into the beginning of April. We are going to see a lot of change out in the world. We've got outer planets changing signs. All planets are going to be direct for around 3 months' time. You guys are going to see change really speeding up all around. And I want to do a little bit, like I said, of musing on some of the archetypal themes that we see with Sun in conjunction to Pluto. I think it's particularly interesting that it's happening at the time of like a dark moon phase. So let me start by talking to you guys about when this is taking place. Although some of you guys who are more sensitive, you may be feeling this now. So you're going to be feeling this from the 17th of January all the way through the 20th, 2023, but the exact conjunction between the Sun and Pluto will be taking place on January 18th, 2023. Depending on what time zone you're in, it's going to be in the AM hours here in the States, and it'll be taking place at 28 degrees of Capricorn. Okay, so if we look up here we have the Sun, here we have Pluto. The conjunction is the meeting, the fusing together of the two. Now in astrology, a conjunction is the strongest aspect. It's the most personal, and it sometimes can be the most transformational. And that's really the name of the game when we're dealing with Pluto in general. Kind of spooky, right? If you guys saw my weekly videos and I talked about how right around the time both Mercury and Mars were coming into the end of its retrograde, they're in a very extended quincunx or in conjunct to one another at an 8. Now, 8s in degree astrology, it has a really strong connection to Pluto, kind of Scorpio type energies. It's about crime, corruption, transformation. Sometimes it can be about deaths and new beginnings. All keywords that we think of when we think of the archetype of Pluto. Now, since 2008, we've had Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. It kind of kicked the door in with the financial crisis in 2008, and Pluto spends roughly about 20 years in a particular sign, and in just a couple months time we're going to see Pluto's ingress into Aquarius. I'll be doing more on that as we go forward, but I do have some content that's already on my channel. I did a Pluto and Aquarius talk with a good friend of mine, astrologer Rose Theodora, so if you guys haven't seen that, kind of scroll back through my stuff, you can go and see that. But I'm in the process of kind of talking to a few friends of mine and trying to put together like a panel, a Pluto and Aquarius panel. Sometime in the future, I'm going to be posting on my community tab, asking you guys what topics, what questions do you have about predictions and what may unfold with the Pluto and Aquarius transit. And I'm going to pick select questions and I'm going to hold a panel, and we're going to showcase a variety of a few different astrologers' hot takes on those questions. So hopefully you guys dig that. Why do I say it's interesting that it's happening during a dark moon phase, which is already kind of like very Pluto, kind of Scorpio-esque, that closing out, letting go, release phase? Well, we're seeing both the moon and also the Sun coming to the late degrees right before we come into what will eventually be a new moon in Aquarius. Now, I put that video out on Sunday. You guys have that video that's for the week ahead, and I talk about why this is such a really significant moment, and that this particular new moon with Uranus stationing is sudden transformation. The conjunction to Pluto is going to be an eye-opening experience, giving us some insight into how we can set new intentions prior to Pluto entering into Aquarius. You may not be in Aquarius, but I guarantee you everybody's got Aquarius somewhere in their birth chart. So This particular shift in this sign is going to bring about change for everyone. But as I said, it takes a period of time for this to unfold. So Pluto is going to spend about 20 years in the sign of Aquarius. For the next year and a half, it's going to go in and out of this sign. So we're going to be really experiencing more of Pluto in Aquarius. I think more so in 2024. I think we're going to have about between 7 to 9 months of Pluto in that sign. But we know that when planets get to the tail end of a particular sign, we see like a real excessive kind of tendency of the qualities of that particular sign, right? So we're seeing this conjunction happen, which kind of represents a dying or a releasing or a letting go right before we come into the new moon where we're setting intention. So it's like so poetic when you kind of look at it from more of like a geometry kind of standpoint. I'd like to start by opening up this morning by reading to you guys from Robert Hand. Okay, so this is something that I have on my astrological book arsenal. I always have this as one of the few or many books on my desk. I've got Planets in Transit by Robert Hand. For you guys who are learning astrology and you're wanting to kind of go beyond just looking at the birth chart, and you're wanting to start learning more about transits, I really recommend this book. This is a book that should be read, should be studied. You can be reading it daily as the transits are taking place, so you have a better understanding of what that transit may materialize as, and also it's going to give you more depth, right? Gotta love Robert Hand, one of the OGs. So I'd like to talk to you guys about what he has to say about the Sun-Pluto conjunction. Two things. One is I always have my book list below, so if you click the links below, it's going to take you to my Amazon book list. I'm not trying to make money, I'm not trying to sell stuff, but people are always asking me, what are you reading? What are you reading? What book are you referencing? All of my books are there. All of my tarot decks also that I use in my readings are there, so you guys can check that out if you ever want to pick up a book and you want to read along, you want to popcorn read. You guys remember that, right? Okay, so this is page number 84. Well, I guess the second thing, I'm an honorary Sun conjunct Pluto in Scorpio. So I have that conjunction natally. I've got Pluto at 15. I've got Mercury and the Sun in a Cazimi at 19 degrees. So I'm within 3 or 4 degrees of the conjunction. And a lot of my conversation today is going to be talking to you guys about experiences that I've had personally throughout my life with that conjunction. And also transits, because I've been realizing and learning that so much of Uranus in opposition to my Sun Mercury right now is sharing experiences with other people and being able to better guide and counsel others through the experiences that I've had personally. So we're going to talk a lot about that later today. So I feel like I've had my passport stamped to hell and back. I've had Pluto touch on all of my personal planets except for Jupiter and my moon. It's hit everything. It's conjunct Mars natally. It's hit my Sun. It's hit my Mercury, my Uranus, Venus, Saturn, Neptune, right? And now it's approaching some squares and also eventually a conjunction to my North Node. So I'm an honorary Hellion. All right, back to the book. Page 84, Sun conjunct Pluto. This transit has a variety of effects, but in general, it indicates an intense experiences that do not allow you to stay at the level of surface manifestations. You will really have to get involved in whatever you do today. The results might be quite powerful. Pluto relates to the forces underlining all experiences and leading fundamental evolutionary changes from within. The inevitable power of these changes produces a major occurrence in the world: growth, evolution, decay, death, as well as rebirth and regeneration. Because this is not a major long-term transit, you are not likely to encounter any of these effects on a terribly profound level, but rather they may occur in your day-to-day life. On a practical level, you may be concerned with repairing something that is broken down, such as an automobile or an appliance, or you may have to deal with a situation that is broken down to the point that it must change radically in order to continue, even along completely new lines. You may have to contend with a person who is trying to exert unreasonable power over you today, forcing you to defend your right to do things your way. The person may feel he or she is doing this for your own good, but that may not usually be the case. True Plutonian energy does not manifest itself through someone's ego drives. It's a transpersonal flow of creative or destructive energy. Under the rare circumstance, you may come into contact with someone who embodies the Plutonian energies within society, such as a person of power, someone who represents hidden elements of change or decay, such as a person living in poverty, a tramp, a criminal, or someone who associates with radical movement of social change. Avoid contact with criminals. Do not go into areas where you're likely to encounter street crime. Under this transit, it's possible you might have an unfortunate encounter. Okay, so this is just literally very by the book, right? And so I want to break this down a little bit further and talk to you guys more about this. And I mean, like I said, I'm going to give you guys some personal examples because I have natal sun conjunct Pluto and Mercury. And as I continue to go through this Uranus in opposition to my sun Mercury, it's like there's these lightning ideas that kind of pop, usually like when I'm in the middle of doing something and I have to make a conscious effort to step aside, write it down, process it, and then kind of put it together so I can start creating these videos for you guys. I want to start with some themes, first of all, just in terms of some of the themes that we see between Pluto and the sun. So generally speaking, the sun in astrology represents a solar figure, right? So it can be a king, it can be a father, it can be a man, it can be a celebrity. It can also be somebody, depending on the sign, right? The sign is going to kind of color or give you that lens in which the sun is going to act. So the sun's in Capricorn. So we're looking at authority figures, we're looking at bosses, we're looking at people who may be on high levels of government. And Pluto, which is Hades, right? Also known as the god of the underworld, the final stop, right? So in modern astrology, we look beyond Saturn. We're going to look at those trans-Neptunian planets, Saturn, beyond that. So Neptune, Uranus, Pluto. Pluto is that death and rebirth planet. So it is about the phoenix. It is about releasing and letting go and regeneration. So just personally, some themes that I have picked up throughout my transits, and I'm going to reflect on this now. Okay, so probably the biggest theme that you're going to see, and this can be personally, but this can also be globally, is the theme of death and awareness, okay? And because it's in Capricorn, it's in a physical sense. Now, in a second, I'm going to go through all of the different time periods over the last few years when we had a Sun-Pluto conjunction and reflect on what's happened historically. And the reason why I'm doing that is I feel like you can't be a good astrologer, at least a predicting astrologer, without understanding cycles and patterns, especially throughout history. Capricorn deals with history, it deals with time periods. So it's important to be looking at the past to be able to better understand the future. Saturn in Aquarius is teaching us this. Pluto going into Aquarius is teaching us this as well, that we really have to be looking at what's happened in the past. So when I say death and awareness, in a physical sense, right? So just reflecting on the last few years, it's pretty safe to say that there's not a single person on the planet that hasn't had to confront some kind of fear or phobia in regards to death, dying, or letting go. Whether this was the fear and the phobia of physically dying, right? I mean, we've had several years. I mean, it's tapered off more so now, but I think of like 2020 and 2021, you couldn't watch the news without like a death toll being put on the screen, letting you know exactly how many people have transitioned and died as a result of a COVID-related illness. Two, I think the other thing is when I say a physical sense, I don't just mean like, oh, I'm afraid to die. It's having to come to terms with the fact that we're saying goodbye to something or someone. Pluto doesn't always talk about physical deaths, okay? So it can sometimes be like, you know, energy or endings of relationships or endings of power struggles, endings of career, right? It can be metaphorical. And I think it's also been about reflecting on what it means to let something go. It can be a legacy. It can be a lot of things. I mean, I go back to, as a personal reference of the connection to like life and death. 2015 and 2016, I went through a death midwifery program, primarily doing it because it interests me, you know, part of my death and rebirth process personally, because I have that conjunction to Mercury, as I feel like I change and I transform through what I learn, right? So I make that conscious effort every 2 or 3 years to go through a new program, learn a new skill, add a tool to my toolbox, so that way I feel like I'm better rounded as a reader or a healer or just anybody who studies metaphysics in general. So it just so happened that that was the year that I was like, okay, I want to become a death midwife. Going into that, I thought it was going to be more learning about how to counsel and work with family members and help them through periods of transition, because I was coming at it from a much more kind of abstract, more kind of air way, right? How to communicate, how to talk to them, how to understand that process of death and grieving, how to help them through the steps of being able to kind of accept and work through releasing and letting go of someone. Well, Pluto in Capricorn taught me that it was going to be a much more physical experience, right? So going into it, the very first few weeks was a lot of like, okay, we're going to go through basically like your living will, right? Or your plan, your death plan, what it means to process that and go through that. And some of the first few questions that my teacher asked was like, okay, we're going to create this directive. If you die, how do you want your remains to be handled? And I remember just being taken back, like, what? I'm 26, 27 years old. Like, why do I need to be thinking about this? Then it progressed into, you need to make a list of all of your physical assets and, have it set up so they know what it is that what you want, how you want your body to be handled, where your assets are going to be going. Do you want a DNR, if you're potentially in the hospital? Do you or do you not want to be resuscitated if you're potentially going through a near-death experience, or, do you want to be brought back? And I remember just thinking, like, these are things I've never thought about ever. Like, ever, I've never thought about this. But suddenly it was in my face. Then the course progressed into not just talking about the process of aiding the family through the transition, but how you handle the physical death. Like, if you're in the home and you're working with the family and they know that they have a loved one that's going to transition, what do you do to be able to better support the physical body throughout that process? What happens to the body? How do they stop eating and stop drinking? How can you keep them comfortable? How sensitive is the physical body and also the light body in the process of transition? So this is obviously some heavy stuff. What I liked about the course is that it had this kind of background of like this Buddhist philosophy, and there was a lot of that tradition that was kind of interwoven into this. And anything from, as the person is transitioning, how to talk to them, how to speak to them, how to hold space, what you may experience physically or spiritually while that transition happens. And taking it a step further, part of being a death midwife is not so much just counseling, but knowing how to treat the body once the person or the soul transitions. How you have to set the body, how we preserve the body, how long it can physically stay in the home, how you shut down the energy points, and really respect the fact that the spirit body is very sensitive. It can be extremely sensitive to loud noises or touch or anything like that, if you believe in that stuff. And then the process of transitioning from the home and like all the rules and the regulations revolving around being able to actually move the body and learning more about different ways of being able to say goodbye and actual burial, right? In Western society, we're so disconnected from that. It's like we pay tens of thousands of dollars to put somebody in a metal box. We have them embalmed. We have them taken away. We're not involved in the process. We show up days later to either a viewing or a funeral, and we say goodbye. But what this experience taught me is that there's so much more to that, and that the death process can actually be so therapeutic for the family. It can bring people together. And the process of honoring the death is just as important as honoring life. When you think about like midwives and anything of that nature, you think about babies, people being born. Not many people realize that as you're going through that process of transitioning, it's very similar. You need somebody to help you along with the process sometimes of actually letting go, and doing it in a way where you have the support necessary, and sometimes having the assistance of somebody who's an outsider to come in to do that, to help you with that process, but also to show you that you don't just have to pass that on to a company and just have some stranger kind of manhandle your loved one and then, and then put them to rest. So it was really, really eye-opening for me in a big way. And that whole process was so awesome because it led me, I think, for starters, to a number of really good books. But this is one that I continue to keep working through. I'm still working through it. It's how thick this book is. The Tibetan Book of the Dead. Now, don't let the title deceive you. Believe it or not, this is a book that's just as much for the living as it is for the dead. And so I picked two, just to keep it short, two significant quotes from this book that I felt were like really moving for me personally. And it really kind of relates to this theme of Sun-Pluto, where we're shining a light on, right? Or exposing, or finally looking at death and transformation. All right, especially in a physical sense, because it's in Capricorn. Are you oblivious to the sufferings of birth, old age, sickness, and death? There is no guarantee that you'll survive even past this very day. The time has come for you to develop perseverance in your practice. For all singular opportunity, you could attain everlasting bliss or nirvana. So now certainly is not the time to sit idly, but starting with the reflection on death, you should bring your practice to completion. The moments of our life are not expendable, and the possible circumstances of death are beyond imagination. If you do not achieve an undaunted, confident security now, what is there in being alive, O living creature? What I like about the book is that it talks a lot about reflections and meditation on death as a means for acceptance and understanding, which in turn is going to encourage us to actually live, to be alive, to be present, and to acknowledge that that is the point of being alive, is to go through that transition and transformation. Not to fear it. So much of the book talks about not to fear it, but the book itself is a series of, in a way, it's like poetry, it's magic, it's healing, it's prayer, right? That's meant to be spoken aloud to aid in the process of helping somebody transition. So you guys have all seen Beetlejuice, right? Like the, what is the book called? Like the guide for the recently deceased. Very much the same thing. And it talks about the process that you go through and all the deities that you encounter and what it's like to go through that process and be able to kind of reach an awareness so you can break that cycle and that pattern of just keep coming back. Okay, second one would be death holds up an all-seeing mirror, the mirror of past actions to our eyes, in which consequences of all negative and positive actions are clearly seen, and there is a weighing of our past actions in the light of their consequences, the balance of which will determine the kind of existence or mental state we are being driven to enter. I mean, we've heard about, near-death experiences, your life flashes before your eyes, people come back, they talk about this awareness they have, they saw the other side. But I think this is more talking about like that review that you have, and that we are seeing everything that we did and whether or not we want to repeat that same pattern, if we're going to come right back into that, right? If we're going to like learn from our experiences. But also I think of grief and how the death of a loved one or the potential death of a loved one for many people leads to like this existential crisis where there's like a reevaluation of that person in your life or your relationship with them or all your past actions, and it makes you become like extremely, extremely aware of how fragile life is and just how quickly anything could potentially change. I know that a lot of these topics are kind of morbid, so for those of you guys who are grieving or who are still reflecting on loss, just know that I think that this is just this is something that everybody has been dealing with. And grief is a weird thing, right? There's so many different layers to grief. There's the bargaining, the mad, the sad, the forgiveness, and then finally like that kind of letting go. And it's hard when I talk about like the physical experience with death and reflecting on that over these last few years. On a very personal level, it's been something that I've had to deal a lot with. Having Uranus in opposition to my Sun Mercury, and having Uranus in opposition to my natal Pluto, literally I call 2020 and 2021 my death wave. that is definitely, that is what it has been. And I think it's been really hard to not just acknowledge that or see that in our everyday life. I feel like it's just, you can't talk to somebody or have an encounter with somebody without them talking about what they've lost or who they've lost or what has ended for them. So it's very there in the forefront of a lot of our psyches. 2, and this is probably my favorite one, but still not easy for everyone. Death as an omen for new life, right? So death being an omen for new life, or better known as endings as a promise for new beginnings. And so that's very much connected to the archetypal kind of symbol of the phoenix, the death and the rebirth process. The bird rises from the ashes, it flies, and it starts over this constant kind of over and over and over regenerative cycle, right? So that's very much connected to Scorpio. And I connect it to like fertilizer. We can't have something grow without all the nutrients that's going to be in the dirt, whether that is like ground up nutrients and minerals, if it's ground up bones, whatever it is that's going to be able to help that soil regenerate and actually give new life, right? So that's how I kind of see this. Just reflecting on this, because Pluto kind of also has this other connection to occultism, you know, psychics, mediums, Ouija boards, seances, the other side. I think back also to 2021. So my grandmother was pretty much like my favorite person in the whole world, my maternal grandmother, super close with her. And she was battling, you know, 2018, 2019, 2020, a lot of health issues. She lived clear into her third Saturn return. She was like around like 93 or 94 when she passed in 2021. But 2021 was just like a really, really difficult year for me. You know, the spring of 2021, I had to put my dog down. And he was like my favorite person in the whole world. He was Sun and Jupiter at 29 degrees of Scorpio with a Sag moon. So he was extremely feisty, but was definitely like my soulmate in so many ways. And he lived to be like 16 and a half, which is insane. He was just like I joked, he was like the crypt keeper. But he was like this dog that I just knew was super magical, and he was like a little wizard. And he was around for all of my metaphysical stuff, always reading whenever I'm like reading tarot cards or whenever I was just doing anything. He was always around. He was my little familiar, and he was having a really difficult time in 2021. And in the spring, I knew that it was just probably the right thing to do to kind of help him over the Rainbow Bridge. And so it's kind of a silly story, but when he transitioned, I was having such a difficult time with it that I decided to contact a pet psychic, a pet medium, which is not silly because these people exist. They're very real. And so I booked an appointment, and I ended up connecting with somebody, and the lady basically just said, just tell me what breed it is. He was a miniature beagle, and give me his name. So his full name was Scouticus Maximus, but I called him Scout, after affectionately the To Kill a Mockingbird character. So I ended up having this session with this woman, and it's really funny because the things that came through were like so bang on and so specific to like things that I used to actually physically say to the dog, right? So like phrases and things I used to say to the dog. And she also referenced like lots of changes that were going on in my life that year prior, and that he kind of like hung around until he knew that I was good, and then he was ready to go. So in the midst of that session, what was really strange is that, you know, she's a psychic medium, but she focuses primarily on talking to animals. In that session, all these things came through from my grandfather. So my maternal grandfather, who was also like my favorite person ever. And he died back in 2012, 2013. So it's been a while that he's transitioned, but my grandmother still continued. They were like the cutest ever. They were married for like literally, I think almost like 70 years. I mean, they were together for a long time. Anyway, he came through in the session, okay, very Sun-Pluto moment, and started talking about, you know, the dog being okay and like all this stuff. And then she started saying how he was talking about, well, I know you're going to be getting married. And I was planning on getting married in November of 2021. And she was like, yeah, she was like, yeah, he knows you're getting married. He just wants you to know, like, it's going to be okay. Like, your grandmother will transition before that happens. And started preparing me, like explaining to me that she was going to go. And it was really, really, really hard because at the time when I had the session, I think it was like May or June of 2021. And I knew I was going to be getting married in mid-November. So it felt in a way like this pressure cooker, this countdown, knowing that it was going to be like a really important kind of turning point in my life where I was embarking on this new thing, but I was also going to be potentially crushed with losing her. And then it ended up happening the weekend of September 11th that a couple nights prior, I started having dreams that she transitioned, that she died. And I was talking to my uncle about it because we were going back and forth about just, you know, at some point we need to go and visit her. And after 2 or 3 days, it just didn't sit right with me. And I was just like, you know what? I need to go. My other grandmother was living with my father in Arizona at the time. And my sister happened to be out there like visiting. And I was just like, you know, I just need to go out there and see her because I just don't have a feeling that this is going to go over very well. Ended up going out there to go and see her. And the very next day, she died. So it was really difficult, but at the same time, it was like this bittersweet thing because it did bring the family together. It also did kind of teach me that it was like this passing of the torch moment, that it was wrapping up the older generation, wrapping up the seniors, or I guess the elders of the family were kind of passing the torch to the new generation. So she passed in September, and then in November I ended up getting married. So it was a lot. I guess what I'm getting at is that in a way, these death signs, these symbols, jobs that end, relationships that end, losing people, transition, right? Making way for a new beginning, making way for a new life. This is something I've seen a lot with clients too. I've seen a lot of clients that, it's like right when, a baby is about to be born, a father, a grandfather dies, right? There's like this weird, okay, we sell our home, right before we embark on this new beginning, and then all of a sudden there's a brand new job or there's a brand new baby. So these deaths and these endings, which seem to coincide coincidentally within sometimes months, sometimes a year of these really significant transitions. I myself have had several friends who have been like, yeah, my dad died, and then a year later, like, oh, I met a really significant person and they ended up being my life partner. So it's always interesting to kind of see that take place. I think in a lot of ways it's really taught me not to resist that ending, that even though it can be difficult to be present with the ending and like releasing and letting something go, and it can be something that's really scary. I think a lot of people are genuinely pretty afraid of death. I think that's fair to say. That when these situations now come up in my life, I'm like, okay, I know that this is just making room for something else. There's a new beginning coming. So it's really taught me not to get completely consumed with the fear of letting go and that release, right? Recently, I was listening to, oh my goodness, what was his name? I can't even remember his name. I feel terrible even saying this. That really significant Indian astrologer. He's the guy who does all the videos. I want to say his name's like KP or something. I can't remember his name. But I just so happened to be scrolling on Instagram, and he was talking about, unfortunately, like his sister going through some really challenging health situations, and he was like updating everybody on his Instagram. And he came back and made another update and was just basically like, yeah, it's not good. She's not doing well. I got to go and be with her. And talking about how he may seem insensitive around the topic of death, but that he sees it differently because he celebrates death and he knows that they're not going to be in pain anymore. They're not going to be stuck, that they're going to have the ability to kind of like supersede the physical, move beyond that, and they get to go to like the next life with like all of their new lessons and their new family. And he sees things very differently. And I was like, wow, that's such a interesting and really important message to be putting out there right now, because I think so much, at least in Western society, there is more fearing death, fearing old age, fearing giving up, fearing letting go, rather than embracing and like celebrating life, right? The older I get, like the more funerals and things that I've gone to, and the more that I really appreciate like the crazy people who have like the celebration of life, that everybody wears Hawaiian shirts, Just recently reshared something on my Instagram. It was like a little old lady who was basically like, I want to show everybody, my funeral outfit. This is going to be the outfit that I'm going to wear inevitably when I have my funeral. What do you think? And she puts on the top and the earrings, and she's like, obviously it went like viral. I think it was like on TikTok, but hysterical to see somebody talking about that, and like they really want to make sure it looks good before they transition, right? So I love that stuff. I love when people can do that stuff. I saw somebody else who hired a flash mob for their for their funeral. So inevitably when they transitioned, somebody was taking video in I think it was like a church. And then you see the flash mob come down the aisle, and then everybody starts dancing. How ironic, the conjunction between Sun and Pluto is literally the theater or the stage, the grand, kind of like showing like of your talent or perhaps of your energy or of your life. And then that conjunction to Pluto is like how death can be creative, death can be celebrated, death can be something that also is like super memorable. Like you can put a mark on somebody with that conjunction. So just a couple musings on that. Another one being death in a figurative sense, so not always being physical, although we do see lots of physical examples of this right now, especially being in the sign of Capricorn. I think that it can be figurative, so it can be also like death of the ego, peering into the soul, being able to like really see what is and is not working. At least on a personal level, that's something that I find myself doing regularly. I've seen a lot of Sun-Plutos that just regenerate themselves. They become totally different people throughout their life. I've noticed this a lot, especially in the Pluto and Scorpio generation. Constantly reinventing themselves and constantly asking themselves, what is going to bring them joy? What is going to bring them happiness? What's going to bring them power? How are they going to feel most alive through the process of releasing and letting go? So death, like I said, it doesn't have to be physically letting go of a person or you dying per se. It can be the end of one phase of your life or the end of one chapter, which is making way for the beginning of another. Probably the most difficult theme for me would be Pluto being catharsis via crisis, right? So Pluto, especially any connections to Scorpio, can be about crisis, but it's catharsis through the process of release and letting go. So it's almost like this buildup of, I can't take it anymore. This is just going to be too much. Oh my God, but I don't want it to end. But what if it ends? But what if I die? Okay, but what if I die? Like, well, then what? You know, like, is that the worst case scenario? The release and the letting go, you know? I think being someone who, like I joke, having had my passport stamped to hell and back, the lessons of demolition and rebuilding are very, very, very strong, at least in my experience. And I feel like I've shared this with you guys, but I've seen this constantly working with clients as well. I've noticed like an uptick and a trend. I just have a lot of clients who are getting readings, getting reports, who have like a lot of Pluto aspects. I've seen a lot of people who have the Pluto conjunctions in Virgo from the late 60s. I have a lot of clients who are Pluto in Sag that have like Sun, Pluto, Sagittarius conjunctions, a lot of Scorpio moons, a lot of Pluto and Scorpio, Pluto moon aspects. And I think you guys would all agree that the lessons of demolition and rebuilding are important because it's kind of teaching you that there is a need to constantly regenerate, that if something is not necessarily going to be giving you life, then it's time to kind of give it death, right? And so probably one of my favorite, there's several. I mean, I went through a background training of Jeffrey Wolf's Pluto School. I really love, evolutionary astrology. I think it's so fascinating. But one of the other teachers that I like to listen to would be Caroline Casey. Especially a lot of her lectures and even her books, you can actually listen to them on audio, which is so great because you can really hear her personality kind of come through. But she talks a lot about Pluto being like a pressure cooker, and that you feel that pressure cooker kind of continue to increase in intensity until you're cooked. Such a great example of talking about Pluto. She also talks about, Pluto being this obsessive, passionate, angry, vengeful, needing to have your night where you light all of the black candles and you read all of the old love letters and you yell and you cry and you scream and you mourn and then you bury it. So also really great. If you guys get the chance to listen to her stuff, She's really great. She has an awesome newsletter also. Exposing the dark, literally or metaphorically. So recently, right, I've been getting up early in the morning, not a morning person, but I have found that these Mercury retrogrades, because the last one happened on my ascendant and this one's happening in my 4th house, has me getting up early. So I'm getting up early generally before or right around the time that the sun is coming up. So I try to be courteous to other people in the house and not wake them up. But since my progressed ascendant has moved into Scorpio, my eyes are extremely sensitive. So now I'm a Scorpio rising. I'm no longer a Libra rising. I've graduated. I've traded peace for truth. So I'm a bit of a shit disturber now. But my eyes are super sensitive. So I can't go outside usually without sunglasses. It's really strange, but I guess it's connected to that progression. And when I get up in the morning, it's still dark. And so I'll get up and kind of through the dark find my way into my bathroom. And I've noticed that it's just too much when I turn the lights on. I'm just like stunned. I just feel like a bat that a light's been shown in their face. So I always brace myself before I turn the lights on. And sometimes I'll even kind of like cover my eyes before the light hits my eyes because I've been so sensitive. Reminds me very much of the Sun-Pluto. It's in many ways, I feel like my eyes are more comfortable in the dark. I feel like I like having dimmer lights in my office. I would prefer there to be zero fluorescent lighting around me. I don't like it for some reason. And maybe there is some connection to that Pluto or kind of Scorpio energy. So when I think of the Sun-Pluto conjunction, I think of literally shining a light in the dark And when we switch that, when we flip that switch on, right? When we shine a light on truth, or we shine a light on corruption, or we shine a light on something that we're not ready to see, there can be a sense of being stunned. It can be stunning. Sun-Pluto, everybody's seen some really stunning things during some of the conjunctions in recent years. If you've gone through a Pluto conjunct the Sun transit, you know that it's stunning, some of the scary things that happen, some of the fears that we finally face and finally deal with, or just the truth of some of these more brutal things that can be happening in our lives. And so when I talk about the Sun-Pluto conjunction, especially in the sign of Capricorn, I think about power. I think about government power and influence, and the unceasing of power, willpower, probes, right? That's going on right now in government. So as the Sun-Pluto conjunction is approaching, we're going to see a light that's being shined on hunger, power, greed. And the question is going to be, are we just giving our power away, right, to those who want more of it? Because we know that darkness can consume light. We've all seen black holes, right? We've seen stuff on black holes that it just sucks everything up. But I like to remind people that even in spite of what can seem like some really kind of dark or challenging or corrupt times, it only takes a little bit of light to illuminate the dark. But I think over the next few weeks, we're going to see after this conjunction, and as Pluto starts to go into Aquarius, that we are stunned. We are literally shocked by some of the things that are going on with the corruption of power in the world, and how far it goes, how deep it goes, because Pluto is penetrating, right? It goes deep into the core to pull up the oil from the earth. So we're going to see how deep the crime, the corruption, right? The tentacles kind of go in terms of big business, right? Money, greed, power, all that stuff. So try not to get stunned in the process. Just reflecting also on a Sun-Pluto transit. When Pluto started coming into a sextile with my natal Mars, and also when Pluto was in conjunction to my natal Uranus, Venus. I mean, I've got Uranus at 2 of Capricorn, Venus at 6 of Capricorn, Saturn and Neptune at 10. So that Pluto transit was a doozy. That was a number of years. That was just constant death and rebirth in a lot of ways. But in particular, Pluto coming into my 4th house and conjuncting Uranus and my chart ruler materialized as some really, really, really interesting things in my family. So, you know, I'm Sun-Pluto natally. My father has Sun and Moon in Aquarius, and he's got Jupiter and Pluto in opposition to his Sun and his Moon. And it's interesting to be the Sun-Pluto and then to see somebody who's got Sun in opposition to Pluto, where it's like, I'm dealing with this on a personal level. They're kind of like fighting the man, you know, or people who are trying to oppress them or kind of have power over them. When these transits happened, my paternal grandfather died, which was it was a series of just really unusual events. Like, long story short, my paternal grandfather always had really, really, really bad issues with anger, like really bad. That was like an understatement to say that he had a temper. And him and my father never really got along. They'd go through periods of like, they would come and visit and they try to mend the relationship, but it was always like this really toxic, tumultuous thing where they would argue and they would fight. And my dad had a lot of issues going back to his childhood with his dad. And while this transit happened for me, when it was conjunct Uranus and Venus, my grandfather was on his deathbed, and my family had just moved to California. They at the time were in Huntington Beach. My dad was really struggling with the fact that he knew that his father was going to transition, and he was in hospice. And my dad called my mother and asked if she would bring all of us to go and see him before he transitioned. No joke. So interesting to observe the whole thing, to be there in the room, like as he was transitioning, and to see him. But I was most taken back by seeing how much it changed my dad, and to see my father go through this process of having a really difficult, very Sun-Pluto type relationship with his father, who constantly, I think, kind of broke down his will, or broke down his self-esteem, or was not kind or was not gentle with him. And in the end, to watch my father sit next to him, hold his hand, talk to him, be there for him, and really heal through the process of saying goodbye and supporting his dad was a really amazing thing to watch. So I think that it has the opportunity with the Sun-Pluto conjunction to practice an awareness and a release and a letting go, which can be, once again, cathartic, but also I think it's about forgiveness and what we can forgive, what we can and cannot forgive, right? Maybe perhaps it was different for me because Venus was involved, so it was like that healing and the release and truly loving someone was walking them home. And I think a lot of people with the Sun-Pluto conjunctions are still struggling with anger and frustration and the unwillingness perhaps to say, no, we're not just going to forgive. We're not going to forgive. We're not going to forget. And that is understandable too, especially being in the later degrees. It can be harder for some people to physically accept or forgive. But what it taught me, especially in the sign of Capricorn, is that it's out with the old, Capricorn, in with the new. And that's especially true right now, right? Because we see Pluto getting ready to leave the sign of Capricorn, which is a cardinal earth sign. It has been since 2008 that it has been taking action and trying to create more business, more war, more control, right? Stronger structure, stronger abilities to kind of dictate what we can and can't do, less and less privacy. Pluto definitely deals with privacy as well. And as Pluto is leaving Capricorn, we are definitely going to see a lot of long-standing traditions, rules, rulers, governments, right? Older people in society that are going to lose power. But this is going to take some time. We're going to see the struggle, I think, in July as the nodes move to Aries and Libra and they square Pluto, that's going to be the real reckoning. So it's not going to be immediate. You're going to see more of this taking place in over the summer. But out with the old and in with the new. And Pluto in Aquarius could be new, right? New networks, new systems, a new internet, new unions, new political parties, perhaps branches. I can't help but reflect on, Biden's recent document exposure. I'm not really here to get political, but I think it's interesting that to me, it seems as if he's kind of being thrown under the bus. He's an older person who is ruling the United States. Half the time, it seems like he doesn't know where he is. And I'm kind of conflicted because part of me is like, okay, I think it's just part of like the political theater. But the other part of me was that something that was monopolized on and kind of utilized to be able to just take over, control, right? Seeing Biden's document exposure currently makes me wonder if what is on the forefront is going to be congressional hearings and, everybody kind of peeking into and peering into or exposing some kind of information in regards to what the Biden administration has done. We know that that's already happening in regards to the involvement in collaborating, or some may suggest colluding with big tech to control narratives on mandates and COVID and health information on social media. That is a thing. We are also starting to see that happening with Fauci. I think this is going to bring up for a lot of us, not only this like awareness, this sudden awareness of just how dark things could be or how much is really going on when we're not looking, but it's also going to bring up obsessive compulsive drives. For many of us, compulsively talking about this, thinking about this, worrying about this, compulsively talking about work, control, structure, schedules, things that relate to Capricorn. So it's important if you're a natal Sun-Pluto or if you're going through that transit to be mindful that you need to observe some of these intense feelings, the effect that it's having on your body, the effect that it's having on your heart. Sun-Pluto does deal with purging and purification. Okay, so literally burning things off. So I think of people who surgically have something removed, somebody who has something lasered off, somebody who goes through, a cancer treatment, somebody who goes through a really, really intense bout of just purging and cleansing. We see this in ayahuasca ceremonies. We see this with various other medicinal detoxification processes. When I reflect on, Pluto transits for me and like obsessive compulsive, anything and everything I do, I keep finding that it just relates back to, but what does it mean? What is the sign? What's coming? What is the omen? And I think that that's just part of the Scorpio kind of paranoia. But part of it is also, I think, the wanting to know what's beyond the surface, right? What's really going on? What's the purpose for all of it? Where is it coming from? What are we not seeing? How can we kind of read between the lines? as Pluto was going through my 4th house and it was coming into conjunction with Uranus and Venus, it wasn't just purely losing my grandfather. It was also simultaneously moving to a new state, totally changing and transforming where I was living. So it was my roots in the 4th house. Years later, because this was a very long transit, it also coincided with the real beginning of my love for astrology and for tarot. Big time, right? Uranus, Venus. I think that I love the language. It's like poetic in so many ways, but it just like made sense to me. That real beginning of the practice of me studying esoteric things was on the back of actually a really brutal and devastating end of a physically abusive relationship. And so I think that that was also so very Venus-Pluto, but Sun-Pluto as well, having to confront and really see archetypally what can be mean, destructive, brutal, violent men. And so that was really difficult for me because that time period went hand in hand with somebody who played a pretty significant role in giving me my first tarot deck and being somebody who I talked to about all my interests and being in this relationship for about 5 years, which ended with like a really devastating blow up and finally kind of ending the relationship as a result of physical abuse. So, difficult stuff kind of comes, I think, with the Sun-Pluto, having to acknowledge that something may not necessarily be healthy, something might be toxic. But what came of that was a string of, series of events that really led me to really focusing more on going deeper and figuring out why that kept coming up throughout my family history, but also for me personally as something that I needed to kind of look at within that Sun-Pluto masculine aspect within myself. What more are we going to hear about with the Sun-Pluto conjunctions? Research. We might have breakthroughs in research. We might hear more about spies, things pertaining to psychic abilities, psychic visions, especially 28, 29 degrees has a connection to clairvoyance. Part of me wonders, is there going to be, a war on clairvoyance, on psychics, on future or fortune telling? We'll see. We might hear more about crime. That's more so like the Hades side of things, crime in the underworld, mob bosses, and anything in regards to things that go on in the shadows, in the dark. So these are some of the things that you guys might hear more about. Just to give you guys some past looks, just referencing, I'm going to take it back. I'm going to start with 2020, okay? And we're going to work all the way up to 2022. So I'm going to talk about the most recent couple years when we had Sun-Pluto conjunction. So let me take you guys back here to January 13th, 2020. So January 13th, 2020, really interesting time period, right? The apocalyptic horseman conjunction here, Jupiter, Pluto, Sun, Saturn. This was the day actually that the Sun and Pluto conjunct, but Saturn happened to be there as well. So in January of 2020, we saw just prior to COVID, okay, so Wuhan locks down about a week later, January 23rd. And then later in January, the World Health Organization meets in Geneva to discuss what's going on with COVID and potentially declare an emergency. Bombshell testimonies in the Weinstein trial. I don't remember the name of the actress, but I know that that's when she first came out and testified that she was raped by Harvey Weinstein. And something that also really sticks out for me in mid-January of 2023 is Kobe Bryant died, right? So, three really significant things in 2020 all happening within literally weeks of each other, just post this particular conjunction. Now, very rare, I'm sure you guys have heard a lot of astrologers talk about just the fact that, Sun and Saturn and Pluto conjunct, obviously kind of setting the stage for some real death and rebirth, especially for, older people, elderly people, some real crisis, Pluto in regards to government, but also power and control. So little did we know, there was information that was known about this prior to it coming out. And it was just a matter of them kind of meeting and going on about this and deciding how they were going to alert the world and let us know what was happening. We didn't know it was going to be several years of experiencing isolation and separation and lockdowns. So now we take this to 2021, And in 2021, this was also January 13th that we saw the conjunction. It was just hours later. But this conjunction was happening at 24. There we go. And in 2021, when we had this conjunction at 24 degrees, we had Biden that was inaugurated, and 20,000 troops arrive in Washington, D.C. at the inauguration to protect Biden and to control crowds. Interesting. So Capricorn deals obviously with government, it deals with superiors, but people in uniform, and that strength and number of power and control happening within government. Same time period, President Trump was impeached. The Dutch Prime Minister resigns after false accusations of welfare fraud. And Health Digest, the highest death toll from COVID yet at the time of January 2021 tops out at 400,000. At least those were the numbers that were being released. Okay, so interesting. We're power, control, manipulation, lies, and death. So these are the themes that we see from this. And then bringing it home to 2022, the most recent conjunction was on the 16th. And this was at 26 degrees, right here. Britain's Prince Andrew stripped of his military titles and royal connections by Buckingham Palace, continuing accusations or alleging his sexual assault issues. Major report on antimicrobial resistance shows 4.95 million deaths worldwide associated with drug-resistant bacteria, making untreatable infections now a leading cause of death. Okay. And Elizabeth Holmes, founder of blood testing startup Theranos, is found guilty on 4 counts of fraud in San Jose, California. Obviously, these are just a few examples, right? But these are the kinds of things that we're going to see. Big business, corruption, people who are in powerful positions in the world, and also significant awareness of death in society. Now, if we look at the future conjunction of this taking place, this is going to be at 28 degrees of Capricorn. I'm curious, you know, this rounds up to 29 in the Sabian symbol. We know that this is a closing out that's going on right now in terms of what's going on with power. I think back to my my death doula training and the death rattle. Those of you guys who know what I'm talking about, that the noise that comes from the throat when somebody is kind of gasping and taking their last breath of air before we see them transition, right? It's just a very distinguishable rattle. 28, 29 degrees of Capricorn reminds me of the death rattle, and it can promote fear and more corruption. It can promote this feeling of we don't have control, we're not going to break through. It can scare people into feeling like they need to give their power away. But it's important not to do that, to not give way to the fear. Know that when Pluto starts receiving a square from the nodes, this will be, like I said, in July of 2023. When the North Node goes into Aries, the South Node goes into Libra, and it begins to square Pluto, we really start seeing that there needs to be a total changing of passing of the torch, changing of the guards. It's going to have to happen. And there is going to be some pushback on corruption and control and manipulation in the world. You want to look at where Capricorn is in your chart. Pluto going back into Capricorn is going to symbolize the need to totally change and transform that house to better usher the new beginning that's coming in Aquarius. Okay, so you want to look at those 2 placements. And to take it a step further and show you guys what's coming in the future, okay, this is the last Sun-Pluto conjunction before Pluto goes into Aquarius. Now we'll see another conjunction that's going to be taking place on January 19th, 2024. And this is interesting. So on January 19th, Sun-Pluto conjunction at 29 degrees. Okay, wow. So that's final. I read this earlier, but I'm going to read this again because this seems really important in light of what's going on in the world right now. We have all of these elitists and globalists right now that are meeting in Davos, Switzerland, making decisions about the 1% of the population. So I'm going to read to you guys from my Sabian Symbols book, 30 degrees of Capricorn, because the sun's going to be there now. Okay, so whatever's going on now, we're going to see this again more so at the beginning of January of 2024. A secret business conference, executive session. The symbol speaks to politics and the determination of individuals to control the course of events and resolve important issues through political alliances. The image of secret business conference, behind the scenes meeting, alludes to a power play or an attempt to determine the outcome of some situation by quietly, cleverly manipulating personal resources at hand. The emphasis here is on psychological insight, a keen understanding of human behavior, and tactical maneuvering. At its highest, it represents strategic planning and extraordinary administrative skills. Negative would be abuse of power, hidden agendas, or taking unfair advantage of others. The accent is on things going on behind the scenes. Secret or private alliances are involved. Your greatest advantage lies in keeping the plan to yourself until you're ready to put it into action. Line up and support before you begin. Guard against placing your personal desires above the interests of the group. Don't try to manipulate others. Stepping stones would be meeting, conference, consultation, allegiances, parley, Congress, assembly, discussion, forum, administration, politics, strategizing, planning, maneuvering, hidden agendas, power plays, and background. As we see planets conjunct these degrees, where you're going to see this right around the time we have this new moon. We're going to see this obviously at the beginning of 2024. I'm really looking at the 19th and the 20th. Okay, because the conjunction is happening, but the moon is coming in to sweep and conjunct Pluto before we come into the new moon in Aquarius. There are these meetings going on in the world right now. People trying to figure out how they can maintain control, how they can control the masses, how they can spin the narrative, how they can manipulate people into giving their power away. Now is a really important time to be paying attention to making sure you're not giving your power away. Change, transformation, death, all these things are inevitable. But I think for a lot of us, it's finally realizing and recognizing that it's time to really turn the light on and see what we have been afraid to look at, what we've been afraid to deal with, and get ready to roll up our sleeves and make some change. Let me know, where is this taking place in your chart? Do you have any placements around 27 to 29 degrees of Capricorn? How are you faring throughout this transit? I'd love to hear from you guys, especially anybody else who has any natal Sun-Pluto aspects. Feel free to leave me comments below. I do read everybody's comments. I can't always get back to everybody, but I appreciate your guys' input, and let's keep seeing what's going on. I'm gonna be now getting ready to start on another video where I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Saturn-Venus conjunction. Otherwise, I will see all of you guys very soon. If you like my content, don't forget to leave a comment below. Give me a thumbs up. It really helps the algorithm. And make sure you're subscribed. If you want to book a personal reading with me, please do. Check out my website. You can go to beyondtheveiltarot.com and you can book a personal consultation with me. I would love to talk to you. Until next time, I'll see all of you guys very soon. Enjoy your week. Take care.